Management webinar, Protecting Your Bottom Line from Fraud. We really appreciate your participation. We're sorry we started a minute late. We're about half of our participants are now logged on, so hopefully the rest will join us shortly. Today's session is intended to define the risk of payment management, provide you with some prevention tips, and help you to begin your payment risk management planning journey. A little bit of housekeeping. We ask that you please mute your phone to ensure that our audio is clear for all participants. Also, please do not place your phone on hold. If you need to leave the presentation for a short time, disconnect the line and dial back in to return. You can use *6 to mute the line if you don't have a mute function on your phone. #6 then unmutes it. By way of description here, my name is Deb Knox, and I'll be getting us started on our risk management journey. I represent Metro Bank's cash management team. My background, I'm a Metro Bank Vice President and have been active in cash management and financial services for over 30 years. I hold a Certified Cash Manager designation from the Association for Financial Professionals and have experience in both cash management sales and product development. I've been a conference speaker at AFP events in Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Chicago. I will be joined today by Dean Sanders, Assistant Vice President and Metro Bank's Information Security Officer. Dean has worked in information technology for 20 years, specializing in information security for the last 7 years. He holds several designations: CISSP, which is Certified Information Systems Security Professional, and CISM, Certified Information Security Manager. Dean will guide us through the payment fraud management planning development process later in the presentation. A wise man or woman once said, "Poor planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on my part." But all joking aside, we know that preparation and planning make a vital difference in the success of any enterprise, and risk management is no exception. Just as you create a business plan, a budget, and a business continuity plan to ensure and preserve your business, it's now essential that you also include payment fraud risk management in that planning process. Our theme throughout today's presentation is to encourage you to plan for potential fraud events and to continue to refine and maintain that plan as risks change. Your plan is not a single event or a destination, but rather an ongoing journey. Here's our agenda for this afternoon. We're going to talk about the risks surrounding payment fraud, how these risks affect your business, how to protect your bottom line from potential fraud events, how to plan ahead to minimize the negative impact of fraud, and how to create an ongoing strategy to manage fraud payment risk, making sure that you incorporate that risk mitigation into your overall business plan. In order to cover this information effectively and stay within our allotted 1-hour time frame, we will take your questions at the end of the presentation. This will allow us sufficient time to respond to all of your questions while allowing anyone who may need to leave the session to do so by 3 p.m. If you have a question or comment, please use the raise your hand function showing on the right side of your screen and type in your inquiry. At the conclusion of Dean's comments, we'll respond to your questions in the order they were received. We'll remain on the line until all questions have been answered. The presentation is also being recorded today and will be available for your review on the Metro Bank website at mymetrobank.com. We'll provide you with the location and access instructions via a follow-up email after the event. So what are the payment fraud risks? Well, clearly the most obvious and greatest impact is a financial one. On a short-term effect basis, you might have a loss of profit, and you might have drain on your resources should a fraud event occur. On a longer term, you may have an effect of getting future credit availability. And an extreme effect would obviously be a potential to terminate your business. But you also have a reputational risk. If data is breached, it could result in either customers or vendors not continuing to do business with you. If a customer loses confidence in your business, they may not continue to buy from you. If a vendor is concerned about the security of their data, they may not continue to sell to you. So clearly your reputation's at risk, your bottom line is at risk, and your business is at risk. Fraud payment types can basically be categorized into three groups: online, check, and cards. Today's agenda is going to focus on online fraud, but we want to spend just a brief amount of time to talk about check and card fraud. I'm going to start with card fraud. From a card acceptance standpoint, if you're currently a merchant, you do not bear the brunt of financial liability if a large-scale breach occurs. But effective October 1st of 2015, the liability is going to shift from card issuers only to being shared by card issuers and merchants who don't have chip-enabled terminals. That shift is going to coincide with the implementation of EMV, or European MasterCard Visa, chip technology on cards, and it's going to necessitate the need to switch to merchant terminals to be able to accept those chip cards. In brief, an EMV chip is more secure than the current magnetic strips on the back of your card. It makes it more difficult for hackers to obtain your card data and compromise the accounts. On this one we could do hours worth of a presentation, so all I would suggest is that you stay tuned for more news on EMV and card technology changes in 2015. With respect to check fraud, currently the highest dollar losses that companies have incurred have been on check fraud. Stolen checks from your mailbox, stolen checks by a former employee, and just outright forgeries and counterfeit checks. But check fraud is something that you have the highest level of control over, and using both good internal controls and cash management service options, there's really no need to take a check fraud loss. So we'll spend a few minutes talking about check fraud. As I said, there's more check fraud nationwide than either ACH or wire fraud. Fraudsters can obtain that bank routing and account number information from your legitimate checks. Again, they may steal those out of a mailbox. They can use high-quality scanners and printers to reproduce checks. And although we write fewer checks than we used to, we continue to use this payment type and will for the foreseeable future. So what can you do about it? Well, here are a couple of common sense tips to prevent check fraud. First, securely store your check stock, deposit slips, bank statements, and check images. Anything that contains your bank routing number and account number. Implement a secure document destruction process. If you need to destroy things that have that information on, make sure that they are properly shredded. Segregate your check issuance and reconcilement tasks. Again, this is a really prudent practice that you should be doing anyway, and obviously you should be reconciling your account on a regular basis. If you use these tips, you'll not only reduce the risk of external fraud, but you'll also help to reduce the risk of internal or employee fraud. Your best check fraud prevention tool is the use of positive pay services. Many of you may be familiar with a gentleman named Frank Abagnale. He is probably the most well-known fraudster of our time, and his specialty was check forgery. So the fact that he endorses the use of positive pay now that he's legitimate is a very, very significant endorsement. For those of you not familiar with positive pay services, here's how it works. Prior to the issuance of checks, a positive pay customer provides the bank with the details of the checks to be issued. That includes the check number, the dollar amount, and the payee. As checks are presented to the bank for payment, we match the issue information to the pending payments to identify any suspect items that could be fraudulent. Those suspect items are then available for your review and decision. Items that are legitimate and should be paid are done so, and those that are unauthorized are returned to the paying bank. You've avoided check fraud using positive pay. A similar service is ACH debit block. This is really a fraud prevention tool for electronic payments instead of checks. Essentially, on an account-by-account basis, you are requesting filters on that account that limit any ACH debits from hitting the account or allowing only specific ones. It acts in a way as a stop payment against any unauthorized ACH debits. Doing nothing really isn't an option. If you want to prevent payment fraud, you can do so by maintaining those good internal controls, educating your employees on the importance of the controls, and implementing fraud prevention services such as positive pay and ACH debit block. As Dean will discuss shortly, you also should develop a plan to deal with potential effects if a fraud incident occurs. Statistics aren't very exciting. The slide's better than the statistics, but they do set the stage for the reason we're here today. Here's just a few. According to Guardian Analytics, 74% of businesses have experienced online fraud at some point in time. 52% of businesses have experienced online fraud in the last 12 months. And it's estimated that cyber criminals are stealing up to $1 billion annually from small and medium-sized business accounts. These numbers illustrate the reality that you either have or will have a payment fraud incident at your business. Another survey was done by the Association for Financial Professionals in which 61% of the respondents to the survey affirmed that they had been a victim of payment fraud. And the typical loss due to that fraud was $20,300. I don't think anyone can afford to lose that kind of money. And finally, in the numbers, on a daily basis, online fraud is in the news. Whether it's a large retailer like Target or Home Depot with a large-scale card fraud or any other type of fraud, there's a ripple effect across the payment system. So the message of today is vigilance and the implementation of fraud prevention tactics to avoid an event. But now we're going to take our journey further than prevention. I'm going to turn the program over to Dean Sanders, who's going to guide us through the next step of our journey to protect your bottom line from payment fraud. Dean?
All right, so let's talk about the plan. As a wise man once said, I love it when a plan comes together. Hopefully the information that we give you today will provide you enough base to build your own plan and be prepared in the event you have an incident. So why do you need a plan? Well, obviously, what Dwight Schrute is saying is not true, that failing a plan is part of the plan. You actually do want a plan. First off, quick response is vital. You want to make sure that you actually have your resources ready and that you have the correct resources lined up and that you've already established relationships with the key resources. So what are the steps of incident planning? There are several, but it can really be broken down into three classes. One is the pre-incident, which is actually developing your plan, practicing your plan. The second that you hopefully never have to get to is the actual incident itself. And then you end up, if you have an incident, obviously you have to have a post-incident where you clean up after it. Hopefully you go back and do some lessons learned. So let's start with the pre-incident. First thing you want to do is build your team. So who should be on your team and why? Well, obviously you need somebody to lead. Somebody who's going to take the initiative to be the voice for the team. You really need to have senior management support. So whether you have actual senior management on your team or not, you at least need to have someone who reports to senior management, who has their ear, who has senior management saying, yes, this is what we're going to do in the event that we have an incident. Depending on the type of incident you have, you may need the rest of what I've listed here. If you have a computer incident, obviously you're going to want some kind of technical resource to help you figure out what's going on, how to clean up. If you have a breach of your financial accounts, you're going to want a financial person involved to help sort that out. You may need to have human resources involved if this is an internal incident. If this is any kind of incident that is going to be reported in the media, you're going to want to have public relations involved, and I'll talk in depth about that. And lastly, you really should have an organizer. Now, the organizer doesn't necessarily need to be a separate person. They can fill one or many of the other roles, but that's going to be the person who's regularly responsible for updating your plan and coordinating some kind of plan testing. You're going to look at your plan hopefully on an annual basis and make sure that what's in there is accurate, up to date, you haven't changed any kind of systems, that the people who are listed in the plan actually still work for your company and fill those roles. And you're going to make sure as well that the people you have listed in your plan, that you have backups for those people. So don't just plan for everybody to be in the office that day. Inevitably what happens is these kind of things happen when somebody's out on vacation or out on leave, and you're missing someone who's a key component on your team, and somebody's struggling to fill that role. So make sure you get a backup and that they know what's going on in the plan as well. So what kind of incidents are you planning for? Well, there's a wide variety of them. The one I'm really going to concentrate on is computer intrusion, but your plan is going to want to cover this wide variety of things. So you're going to want computer intrusions. You're going to want if, God forbid, your bank account gets hacked into and you have a theft of funds. If you have a physical security breach. So if a computer or laptop goes missing, a smartphone that has important information, removable media, paper documents that you keep in your office that may have business critical information on them, any of those things would be a physical security breach. You're going to have to account for what was stolen and have a plan to mitigate that. Denial of service. In this context today, with your kind of business, I'm talking more about inability to access your financial institution's online banking website. So what do you do if you can't get there? Hopefully your backup plan is you have a relationship that you can get on the phone and talk to somebody, or go to your local bank branch and talk to the people there. But at least have a plan for that. Destruction of equipment, Deb mentioned, of course, check fraud and credit card compromises. All of these things should be accounted for in your plan if they apply to your business. So you're going to have to make a bunch of decisions as well when you're building your plan. Obviously, one of the first things you want to do is decide if money's stolen, how are you going to operate your business? So imagine for a minute that hackers manage to access your online banking account and transfer all the funds out of it. How are you going to pay your employees? How are you going to pay your vendors? Don't wait till the incident to establish a line of credit, to make some important decisions about how you're going to handle that. Inevitably, these happen at the worst possible time. Imagine if your bank account was cleared out and you need to pay your employees. What are you going to do? Another big decision to make is, are you going to prosecute? So if somebody does this to you, I'll tell you that incidents I've seen typically are difficult to track back to a single perpetrator. They're typically done by organized crime groups out of foreign countries. So even if you were able to track it back to who you think is responsible, actually being able to prosecute is difficult. But again, imagine if you had several $100,000 stolen out of your account. At that point, you may want to prosecute, and you may, at that point, need to collect evidence and do so in a professional manner that would stand up in a court of law. I would imagine most of you, if you have 6 figures of funds stolen, are going to get law enforcement involved. Law enforcement, with that high dollar amount, will or should be very active with that. They're going to try and help you, but you're going to want to get a professional organization to help you do this and help you be on call, really, in the event that you need them. Kind of goes in with the next bullet point, but do you need professional help? I would say anytime you think about prosecuting, yes, you need professional help. There are people who are trained in computer forensics and know exactly how that information is supposed to be saved and stored. in order to be presented in a court of law and to hold up in a court of law. You certainly don't want to go to prosecute, take your evidence to court, and have your evidence thrown out because you relied on your untrained staff to collect it, and the court just won't accept that. Are you legally required to report a breach? So some of you may work for organizations that collect credit card numbers. You may very well be required to report that information back to your bank, back to the card entity, the Visa, MasterCard, whoever's numbers are being collected there, and that may very well become a public event. Last bullet point on here that's really important to think about is, can you live without your computers? This goes back to if you get law enforcement involved, if you have a high dollar theft, law enforcement may very well come in and say, we need to take your computers and seize them as evidence, and you might not really get a whole, well, your choice at that point would be, do we prosecute, do we not prosecute? If we're going to prosecute, the police are going to take our computers. Can we operate our business without these computers? Do we have a plan in place to replace these important computers in the office? Do we have spares? Do we have a relationship with an IT vendor that we can go out and quickly get new and have those in our shop in a reasonable amount of time? As far as finishing your plan, you're of course going to want to document the steps and responsibilities, and you're going to want to go through the individual event types and decide what are the procedural steps that I need in here, who's responsible for each of those. You're going to want to compile your third-party contacts. So you're not going to want to fudge through this on the day of an incident. You're going to want to have an up-to-date list of your bank contacts, if you use any kind of IT vendor or security vendor, law enforcement. If you need legal help, you're going to establish that in advance. You're not going to want to flip through the yellow pages or do a Google search on who can help me now. You're going to want to pick up the phone and talk to somebody you already know and say, I'm having problems, send help now. Because you're going to want to quickly move on to do other things. The other extremely important piece of this is you need to establish your communication plan, both internally and externally. So if you have an incident, you're going to want your employees to be able to respond to customer questions about it. Imagine that whatever happened becomes public, and your customers are calling your employees. You want your employees to know, to be able to say, here's who you need to talk to, or here's the bullet points that I can answer for that. Yes, we had a breach. Here's what it covered. Here's what you're expected to do. And here's when more information will be available. And you're going to make sure your internal employees know that. So if they're not supposed to speak to the media, they need to know who to send that person. If they get a call from a reporter, they need to know who to send that to. Additionally, you need to have a plan for who talks to people outside the company, as far as media reporters. And that really should be a person that obviously speaks well. It's typically your public relations person, whoever the face of your company is. People should know who that is to go to, and that person, you should have a single point of focus for those media questions. So what happens when you have an incident? Well, you activate your team, and in your immediate actions, you're going to want to document everything. Again, if you're going to prosecute, you definitely need to have everything documented that you did. You have to document what happened, what you're doing about it, be extremely detailed. I recommend, even if you're not going to prosecute, follow this step carefully. Document everything you're doing, because there may be steps that you need to go back to later. Everybody's kind of in a flurry, that panic of, oh my gosh, this happened to us. What are we going to do? How are we fixing this? People may make changes that you don't think about later, or you may go through and do a number of steps to remediate this and then say, gee, did I really do that step? If you've documented that you did it and took good notes, you can at least go back and say, okay, here's what I did. Yes, I did do that, or no, I completely missed that step. I got tied up in a phone call with somebody else, with the security company, getting somebody out to help me, and I skipped over that. You're going to want to verify the incidents. You want to go in and make sure, yes, this really did happen. If you need help, you're going to want to reach out. Certainly, if you have a breach of your online banking system, you're going to, assuming that you're going to prosecute and you have IT and security help, you're going to want to reach out to your IT contact, your security contact, your bank, and then at some point you're also going to want to reach out for law enforcement. You need to assess that risk. You're going to have to say, yes, it was a large sum of money, or no, it wasn't a large sum, or it was enough of a sum that it's going to affect operations. And hopefully at this point you can also identify the source. Really, when you assess that risk, you want to know, is there financial loss? Was there access to customer financial information? Did we lose trade secrets? Really what happened to us? And that really kind of informs the rest of the further steps of your plan. After you've done the assessment and you've really reached out, then you can jump into the secondary actions. That's when you kind of temporarily protect yourself. If you have computers that you think may have a malicious software on them, you're going to want to quarantine those computers. If you know that there's malicious websites that are hitting you, you're going to want to start blocking those. Again, if you're going to prosecute, you really want to ensure that evidence is preserved. I would talk to your forensics person before you even temporarily protect yourself, just to make sure that you're not destroying evidence. There is malicious software out there that when it infects your computer, when you go in and you start typing commands on your computer, you go through the normal shutdown process, it will make changes and it will clean up after itself, and you will have lost important evidence that you may not get back later in an investigation. I really can't hammer away enough on the evidence collection. You really need to discuss beforehand if you're going to prosecute or not. It's really hard to shift if you say, oh no, we're not going to prosecute, and then suddenly you're faced with a large financial loss and you say, well gee, now I really do want to prosecute, but we've done all these steps ahead of time. You've lost a whole bunch of evidence and your chances of prosecuting are very slim. So again, I can't hammer home hard enough. If you ever think you're going to want to prosecute, reach out and get some kind of professional assistance in advance. So what do you do after an incident? Well, you want to go and protect your castle. So you're going to want to take that assessment of what happened and make some corrective measures. You're going to want to do things like changing your passwords. If your bank account was breached, you may want to change your bank account numbers. You're going to need to assess if you have malicious software on a computer in your office, if that malicious software managed to jump off to any other computers. If you're not going to collect evidence, well, even if you are, after you're done collecting evidence, it's really difficult to clean malicious software off of computers, so I highly recommend that you wipe those affected computers and start them back from scratch. You should also take some corrective measures around your online banking account. We always recommend that you add some layers, particularly when you've been breached. You want to go back and look, do we have the alert set up that we should? Am I notified when there's a new payee set up? Am I notified when funds leave my bank? We recommend always that you set up dual control. For those of you who don't know what dual control is, you would have one person who enters a funds transfer in your system, and you have a separate person who would actually log in and release that funds transfer. So it's two separate people, two separate logins, hopefully two separate computers that you're using. It's much harder for people to transfer funds outside of your bank if it relies on two people getting in and releasing those funds. We recommend that you have a dedicated computer that you use for your online banking, and that you set up limits. Limits should really be realistic, so if all you do for online funds transfer is, say, a weekly payroll run, and your weekly payroll run comes in, say, $70,000, you want to set your limit pretty close to that. You don't want to say, well, in the event that we might want to at some point transfer funds that'll be up to $500,000. So let's set our limit at $500,000. If you don't really do that, set it pretty close to what you do and call your bank when you need to make a change to it. You can call us up and say, I'd like to temporarily move my limit to this and then move it back down after we do this funds transfer. The other thing I recommend is talk to your IT folks. You should have some good IT controls in place. Hopefully everybody has firewalls protecting you from the internet, antivirus software running, that everybody's patching their software regularly and go on to new versions of Windows and Microsoft Office when they come out. So what are some of the lessons that have already been learned by us and some other companies? Hopefully you don't end up like these guys after an incident. First and foremost, again, I beat on this a little bit earlier, but I can't beat on it enough. As far as talking to the media, make sure you have a point person. Decide as a group what kind of information you're going to release and when you're going to release it, and be prepared for negative publicity. The company that I think did a very poor job of this was Paytime, and if you recall, that was earlier this year. That was a local payroll company that had a breach, had information stolen about their customers. They didn't release information in a timely manner. They weren't very clear to the public about what had been taken. They actually weren't even very clear to the customers about what had been taken and when and what the risk was. You really do need to be upfront with people. Make it quick, clean, be forthcoming about what happened. People today are used to hearing about this. They're much better if you tell them about it, tell them what happened, tell them what was stolen, and hopefully if you can narrow it down. If you need to come back and say so later, tell people that you're going to do that and give them a good time frame and stick to it. Quick and clean is best. And again, I talked about this earlier, having a communication for your employees is also critical, because you're going to have customers who call and ask for information, and you want that message to be unified. You don't want your employees coming up with the message on their own. Again, can't beat it enough. As far as the plan goes, you need to communicate to your employees that you have a plan and that they know who to go to activate the plan if they think there's an incident. You can buy cyber insurance these days, so if you think that you're going to have that there's a possibility that you're going to have a financial incident through a computer hack, you can actually buy insurance to cover that. There's a number of companies offering that now, and I recommend that you go out and hire a reputable security vendor. They can help assess to see where you're vulnerable. They can go through your plan and help identify any gaps that are in it. They can help tell you where you should test the plan, and maybe even build a scenario for you and walk you through it, do a little tabletop exercise to make sure that what you've written down actually applies in real life. At this point, I'd like to actually talk about some prevention, and these are some lessons that we've learned as far as the incidents that we've seen. A lot of companies have security that's much like an egg. You break through one layer, and pretty much everybody's staring at you at that point. You're breached, and fraudsters have taken your funds and they've moved on. A lot of companies really need to be much more like an onion. Onion has layers, and you want anybody who's trying to get to you to have to dig through individual layers. You want to make it so onerous for them that they give up before they get to the middle. So how can you build some layers? I recommend you use passphrases. A lot of people are pretty lazy and want to keep the same password all the time, and keep it pretty short because it's easy to remember and you never lock yourself out and have to call the help desk to get in. I recommend you use a passphrase. Make it a sentence, leave the spaces in, use some punctuation, and if you make that at least 12, 15 characters, it's going to be much harder to break. I recommend you change that regularly. Regularly does not mean changing that every month or even every other month, but don't have the same password year after year after year. At least try and change that password, 2, 3, 4 times a year, depending on how complex of a passphrase you've used. Review your balances and activity daily. So whoever's responsible for making financial transactions out of your account, you should have a separate person that's actually looking at the balance and making sure that what's going out was supposed to go out. Don't have complete faith in the person that's the sole person writing checks for you. I talked a little bit earlier about establishing alerts, so make sure you know when you have funds transfers going out online. Make sure you know when there's a new payee set up. Talked a little bit earlier about dual control. Highly recommended. Set those transaction limits. And Deb mentioned earlier about establishing ACH debit block and positive pay. Another thing that I push pretty heavily is using a dedicated computer. And it's not just that you have a dedicated computer, but it's what you do on that computer as well. Only use it for online banking. Don't use it for email. Don't surf the web. Save your links so that you know that you're going to your online banking account. That way, most malicious software these days come into companies through email, or you browse to a site that has that's somehow serving up malicious software. You get infected, the hackers are able to take over your computer, hop from there to your online banking account. If you don't do anything on a computer other than online banking, it's really difficult for them to hop onto that. So it's cheap. You don't need a high-speed computer to do this. You can take an old computer that's sitting around the office and repurpose that. Make sure you educate your employees as well. A lot of people don't really know what phishing is. Your employees should know roughly what a phishing email looks like. They should know if you're getting an email with attachments or with links, don't open the attachment, don't click on the links unless you know and you're really, really sure that this is coming from a trusted source. Your employees should know a little bit about social engineering. I can tell you that the bank will never call you and tell you, hey, we can see that you're having technical issues and we'd like to help you out. We're good, but we're not that good. We've actually seen that happen where customers have been called up by people outside attempting to talk to them through doing funds transfers, and that's kind of the starting line. Hey, we can see you're having trouble with your online banking. We're here to help. Your employees should also know reporting unusual activity to the IT department. If the computer's acting weird in any way, people kind of seem to trivialize this at times, but if your computer's slowing down or locking up or reboots by itself, or you get a pop-up, some kind of warning message, you really should just let your IT department know, and they really should take a look and see if you have malicious software on there. I realize that people don't want to call all the time, but the flip of that is you also don't want to have malicious software on your computer either, so it's a bit better to be safe than sorry. At this point, we're going to open up the floor to any questions, and I'm going to pass this back to Deb.
Okay. Well, thanks, Dean, for guiding us through the essentials of an incident response plan. Certainly on behalf of Dean and the entire Metro Bank team, we hope that we've provided you with some good insights today to help you to understand the risks that surround payment fraud and how to mitigate those risks, and how to create a plan to minimize the negative impact of fraud if you're ever faced with that challenge. And we know your time is valuable, and so we hope that you had time well spent today with us this afternoon. We're going to address questions, as Dean said. Any questions that you submitted throughout the presentation, we'll be answering those, and then any follow-ups that you might have after we finish with those. After today's event, we're also going to be sending you out a follow-up email to ask for your feedback on the session, and also to obtain any suggestions that you might have for future webinars. At that time, we're going to distribute a sample incident response plan to you as a thank you for your participation today. So, Dean, what questions do we have here?
I don't think we have any questions at this
point. Oh my goodness, that's amazing. We couldn't have answered everything. Do we have questions out there? If you want to unmute your lines, That would be the #6 function.
Here we go.
Would unmute. Oh, okay, we've got a written one here. Hold on.
And the question is positive pay difficult or expensive to implement?
I'll field that one. The answer is no, it is not difficult to implement, and it actually is quite reasonable. Typically on the implementation side, you're looking at maybe a 2-week process after the paperwork has been provided. There may be testing involved depending upon how you're going to send us that file of issuance information. But again, the time frame is not really very long. When you consider the potential loss on your checking account, I would term it to be very inexpensive insurance, on a monthly basis. Again, we have listed in our information the contact phone number for Metro Bank's Cash Management Customer Care Unit. Feel free to reach out to us on that, and we will be very happy to come out and talk to you about positive pay and ACH debit block. Do we have any other questions there?
Not at this time.
Anybody on the line that has a question that they prefer to say as opposed to typing? Boy, Dean, we must be really good to have finished this early. Well, again, thanks so much for participating. We really appreciate it. Metro Bank appreciates your business, and we welcome any comments and recommendations that you have for future events. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you.